Welcome to another episode of Crash Chords Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. And before we get to this week's guest, I just want to, as always, shout out my patrons Rob Starobin, Robert Prine, Mary Jane, and Case Aiken. Thank you for supporting me on Patreon. If you too would like to get a shout out on this podcast and other really cool rewards, go to patreon.com/Stormageddon. It starts as low as $1 and goes all the way up to a private DJ gig for $500 and tons of stuff in between, including fan fiction, needlepoint, playlists, audio content, a whole bunch of stuff. So go check it out. I appreciate the support. Also, just liking, subscribing, reviewing helps a ton. On to this week's guest. My guest is the incredible Heart Crimson. They came on the show to talk about their incredible burlesque show called Burlexes. It is a ode to the past relationship. It's a burlesque show that focuses on what has happened and how we have grown from it. It's really awesome. We talk about a few different things, but for the most part, this episode focuses on that. And in that episode, we did not have a date for that show this year, but they have since reached out and let me know that Burlexes this year, in our year 2019, is happening on September 14th at the Wow Cafe Theater in NYC. Ticket details are to come. Follow my Twitter or the website for Crash Chords to get more information. But enough about that. Enjoy this episode where I chat with the incredible Heart Crimson.
Was maybe in 2013 or 14. 13, I think. Oh, it was a New Year's Day wedding, and it was at Neil Gaiman's house.
What? Was he there?
Yeah, he was there.
Whose wedding was this?
Two friends of my date.
Okay.
And I was just the plus one, and Amanda was there, and...
Well, I'd assume.
Yeah, I mean, like, he was like, yeah, it's just Neil Gaiman and Amanda Popper's not here. But he's tall. He's, like, really tall, and fly away black hair.
Yeah.
And just, he's so dream. Like,
he
is that character, like...
I met him once for a Tuesday Out, which was his kids book that he wrote. I went to the signing for it, and like I don't usually I can function around celebrities that I admire and not like swallow my foot, but for whatever reason I was fine until I got to the table. And I couldn't talk. Like I mumbled through how he wrote my favorite episode of Doctor Who, how much I love,
damn it,
and how I love the book, and I just Coraline, and it was a mess.
It's so hard. I was in line behind him at the buffet. This was weird. It was at the buffet in the house, and it was. He and Amanda had moved into a very, a large, a manor.
Mm-hmm.
And they were there temporarily because one of Amanda's childhood friends was dying. And so they hadn't had their son yet, and they just moved. And Amanda named her son after this person.
Oh, wow.
And they moved into this manor, and it was just the two of them, but it was, so many bedrooms. And I remember, the house was it was, cavernous, and old and beautiful, and, they let these two friends use it for their wedding, and the way that it was, they were both or one of them at least is a musician, and so all of the garlands were made of sheet music that had been cut into paper chains, and it was really beautiful. And they had set up different rooms for different things, which is what you have to do in a mansion with so many bedrooms and two people living in it. And even the walk-in closets were big enough for, they had set up some walk-in closets to be, quiet spaces if you need to, take a step away. And, you could go into one of these, closets and sit down, and, there were, comforters and pillows and string lights and all these little, paper chains. It was so beautiful. And I was, one of the brides, also, her band also played at the wedding.
Oh, cool.
And it was cool. And, I don't know if there are technical terms for wedding meals, the food. It wasn't a dinner and it wasn't a lunch. I don't know what it was.
Okay.
It was somewhere in between, and it wasn't ceremonious, but I was like standing in front of Neil in line to like self-serve some food. And I didn't say anything to him because I like couldn't.
Yeah.
I was like, what the, like, oh, you changed my life. Like,
I know, yeah, it always sounds so stupid.
I couldn't do it. But I was like, I just need to, I'm just going to get some more mushroom caps. And I put some fucking mushroom caps on my plate. And that was what I said to Neil. And he was like, okay.
Yeah, of course. By the way, I've been recording, just so you know.
I'm glad. I'm glad that you have this memory.
This is on record now.
I'm glad.
For those tuning in, I am chatting with the incredible Hart Crimson.
Okay.
I can't even say your name. Hart Crimson. Thank you for being on the show and sharing your wedding stories about being at Neil Gaiman's home.
I haven't been to a wedding since. I think
really
partially is that like people my age aren't really getting married.
Yeah.
That at least that are in my close circles.
Sure. Not the old fogies like us who are already married.
Listen, I want a good old-fashioned party. I have the phrase that people joke about is like, I don't think I want to be married, I think I want a wedding.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people say that when they mean like I want a party.
Yeah. Well, because also weddings are very specific kind of party and performance.
Yeah.
Like even if, I mean, like when I got married, I was genuinely happy and excited, but there are also stressful things that day. And like, so part of it is performative. Yeah. And I could totally see someone just wanting that part. I mean, that's why Tony and Tina's wedding ran for as long as it did. Is like people want to be a part of that festivity without it being a real festivity.
Yeah. My friend was like, I don't think that I want to be married. I think that I want attention.
I mean, you know, it's
like
legit.
I want people to fly to this party. I want people to get on a plane. And like have to plan months in advance to attend this party that I'm throwing.
Right. But just saying I'm having a party doesn't have the oomph
really
that like a wedding or a
doesn't.
Sweet 16 or a B'nai Mitzvah does. That's really funny. But I get it. Yeah, totally. I mean, we're living in a world where like there's so much pressure on relationships and parties and being happy and all of that stuff in a way that is visible to the social world around you. Like, I remember, like, I mean, you have a lot of experience curating an online persona, presence, all of that nonsense. And I have too. A few weeks ago, and this is the first time I'm actually mentioning on the podcast, I got locked in an elevator for an hour. Yeah, God. And I'm claustrophobic, and it was traumatic. And, like, I had a coworker talking to me through a crack in the door. It was stuck on my floor, thankfully. But, like, as soon as it was over, I broke down. I went home after work. Yeah. But there was this weird part of my brain that was like, how do I post on social media about this?
Yeah.
Because, like, I want people to know why I'm not posting, and also I want some sympathy for, like, this thing I endured. Yeah. And so, of course, you make the post about, here's the thing I endured, I'm miserable, I'm upset, and people come to you. But then it's, like, a few days later when I'm posting a selfie, I'm like, this doesn't feel real or authentic. Yeah. Because, like, I'm not in a good place still. Mm-hmm.
And there's a threshold of acceptability.
Right.
To still be shaken up by something.
Well, yeah, and I had people cracking jokes in my office at first because they didn't know. Like, so someone who wouldn't be scared in that situation. Yeah. And there's a woman in my office, really lovely. She walked up and she's like, so, you know, still traumatized? Like, wanting to have fun and, like, make me feel better. Yeah. And I was like, actually, I'm claustrophobic. I was quite traumatized. And she immediately felt sorry. And was like, which is fine. And again, I didn't take offense to that, but it was like, there's this expectation to be okay immediately.
Oh, totally.
My brother did that too. He sent a text saying, nobody got locked in any elevators today, did they? Yeah. And it was like a week later, and I didn't respond. And then he wrote another text like a few days later, like with a sad face, like, I guess this didn't go well. And I was like, and I explained, I was like, this was really upsetting. Yeah. I didn't really appreciate it. And he immediately apologized.
Good. So, but still, it's like, yeah, there's totally that expectation that you have an acceptable amount of time to be upset by this. And then after that, it's like, we can joke about it, right? And it's like, actually, I carry this.
Yeah, I can't joke about this thing. Well, also, like, for people who don't get affected by that stuff, to them, they have no idea what the acceptable time period is. Like, there are tons of comedians who work heavy trauma into their acts, and after a short amount of time.
Yes.
You know, the example that jumps to mind is Tig Notaro, who's been through so much, and she's been writing jokes and performing about the stuff she's gone through since it happened, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because that's how she processes.
That's part of the processing.
Right.
Sure.
But like someone who doesn't process through art or doesn't process through that stuff doesn't quite know how to do that. Or what the time period is for doing that.
I remember when I was on Instagram, and like I remember being so visible for so long.
Yeah.
And it was making my pain visible, but also that visibility giving me pain too.
Sure.
Kind of like feeding on itself. And like I think that like the best parts of that persona that I was curating was really just that like I would get messages from other like Asian queer people, trans people of color, like all over the United States and sometimes the world, who would be like, I've never seen somebody who looks like me do what you do.
Yeah.
And that's what I miss
about
Instagram. I don't miss a whole lot else. I don't miss a lot
fair.
else about being that visible.
Yeah.
Because like every third comment is about my feet, you know what I mean?
Of course,
like,
or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, I have to say, as a white male on Instagram, I don't often feel seen, but you know, there aren't much people like me on the Instagram. No, I'm kidding. Like it's ridiculous the stuff I hear that other people go through on Instagram, both the good and the bad, just based on the fact that there's a limited visibility for all different kinds of people. Whereas, like, you know, I'm for the most part, always dressed white male on the internet. So most people don't give a crap about what I have to post. And that's legit. Like, I'm a dime a dozen, and that's fine. But it's always interesting, like, the brief times when I post, like, a cast photo from a burlesque show, or, like, I recently posted video game stills from a game called Shantae, Half Genie Hero, which is about a female protagonist who's a half genie hero, has very curvy hips and is like shows her midriff. Like, that's the design of the character. And I posted a screenshot of a boss battle with a giant mermaid who's also very curvy. It's just the style of the animation. Yeah. And the first comment is, "Wow, look at those big boobs." And I was like, dude,
who
really?
are you?
Like, why?
What is
why?
going on?
Why?
What is going
we get
on?
it. Like,
What is going on?
these designs are aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
That's not what this post is about. Why are you here?
Yeah. Because I can't stop thinking about my dick.
I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me to hear that. I mean, for me also, like, I have no idea what my online persona is. It's whatever people perceive it is at this point, because I'm throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Totally.
You know, with my 4 podcasts, several burlesque shows, DJ career, and the day job. You know, it's like... So actually, I have an interesting question about Burlexes, which is the show that you produce every year. It'll be the 5th year this year.
Yeah, turning 5.
Yeah. When you first started it, social media wasn't as ubiquitous, right?
Right.
So...
Entirely.
Was there a trans... And so the show, for those listening who don't know, is focused on the experience of dealing with past trauma and your exes, specifically.
We call it Burlexes, an ode to the post-relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which... Has social media influenced how you promote that show or how you engage with it?
Interesting.
Just because, you know, also how we engage with our exes differently now. Like, when you were dating someone in high school before social media existed, when you broke up, maybe you saw them around school, but after that, they were gone.
Agreed.
Whereas now you break up with someone, if you're still friends with them on Facebook and forget, they show up in your feed and you're like, oh God, why?
Yeah.
Or, oh God, awesome. Like, depending on how that goes.
Absolutely. I think... So the first ever Burlexes that we did was on a college campus, and so all of that promoting was very like, it was like flyering. Like, we truly were like printing
old school
out
rock
pictures.
and roll.
Yeah, we had like, it was like I had written some words over a picture of some of the members of the troupe, and we printed that out and like plastered it places. And I also was not as big on Instagram as I was when I was my biggest on Instagram.
Right.
And that was a really limited audience they were like all the same demographic. They all went to our college, right? And I think that last year, the 4th Burlexes in New York City, we did it at Wow Cafe Theater, was the first Burlexes where like there were some people in the audience that I really had no idea how they got here.
Oh, wow.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Usually it's like people that I know personally, people who know one of the performers personally.
Right.
And that's really interesting and really cool, and it allows for a really intimate space, but I also love allowing new people in.
Yeah.
And that's really, it's rewarding in a different way.
Sure.
I think it's also, the way that I've used social media and Burlexes in the past has been about platforming some really excellent visual art that has a lot to do with breakups and a lot to do with exes, and this really universal experience of having loved somebody and not loving them anymore. Or somebody having loved you so intensely that you might have thought you'd spend the rest of your lives together, and now you're strangers. So painful, and so many people can really relate to that. And so I think in that way, that's been a lot of the promotion of Burlexes in the past.
Right. But it must be cool, though, to have promoted it through social media and having strangers in a room.
Yeah.
With a show that's so intimate. Do you remember if any of those people came up to you after to talk to you about the show?
They did not.
They didn't?
Yeah, because I think that there's like, I also, I don't know. It's hard to, in post-performance state, it can be really hard for me to meet new people.
Yeah, totally.
For sure. I get that. People want to be so kind afterward, you know. But I'm just like, I'm not in the headspace for it a lot of the time. I want to like lie down. After I count all this money, I need to lie down and like not talk to anybody for like a day.
I mean, also with Burlexes, because it's so emotionally raw, even if the breakup went well, no good breakup has no baggage.
Yes.
Like, I'm best friends with one of my exes, but she would readily admit, as do I, that there was a ton of baggage when we broke up, and we hated things about that relationship. One of the things is that we were destined to be best friends. We mistook that for true love.
Yes.
And then hilarity ensued. Finger quotes. But what's interesting to me about Burlexes is, like, it can be exhausting even if you're in a happy relationship. So I contributed to it. There's a section where you encourage people to write things down on flammable paper, and then you send it out into the universe. You read it, and then burn it, it goes away. And that was...
And we do that, we read that on stage for everybody to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, for me, as someone who wrote something down that I didn't realize I was carrying it with me until I wrote it down, and when it went up in flames, I felt lighter, and I was happily married at that time for several years. I've been happily married.
Yeah.
This is about a past relationship that has evolved beyond that, and it still felt good, and it still felt cleansing, and it still felt... This show, not to butter you up too much, is the closest thing I've had to a religious experience.
Oh my God.
only because like, I'm Jewish. We celebrate the holidays. Jury's still out on God, but I celebrate the holidays and the traditions and all that. But at Burlexes, it was the fastest I had admitted something to myself, shared it with a room full of people, and then felt it go away, and that felt very spiritual to me.
Oh my God, yeah. It is, in a lot of ways, sanctity. It is a really intense and freeing experience for a lot of people, and I think what I love the most about Burlexes, and Burlexes is my favorite thing that I do. It's like the thing that I am proudest of and the thing that I want to be remembered for when the burlesque apocalypse happens, I guess, or
it's
like
only a matter of time at this point.
I think that like there's a lot of room in Burlexes to acknowledge that there are as many ways to break up as there are to be a person.
Right.
And it's there's such a breadth of experience that comes, like, we've had so many different acts about such different parts of the post relationship.
Yeah.
The first year that we did Burlexes was really raw for a lot of us, and that my act that year was it came from a really deep place of pain, and in the act I shotgun a beer and then I throw up in a gift bag on stage. Yeah, it's like it's so intense, and part of that metaphor is like forcing your body to expel something,
right?
Even if you don't necessarily, even if everything else cerebrally is telling you not to let this thing go, your body's like, you have to let this thing go,
right?
And we've also had acts that were about joy and about like breaking up with all of the older versions of yourself that would have handled this differently than you would now. Cool. And we also have acts where you are the ex and you actually did the bad thing.
Yeah.
And we have acts about outgrowing things. A performer who doesn't really perform anymore in the first year cut their dress off with scissors as a means of like having outgrown this very long-term, very serious relationship where they thought they were going to get married, you know?
Right.
And let's see, we have acts. We've also, in the last year, it's interesting because we did Burlexes for 2 years in New York, 1 year in Chicago, and then the fourth year was returning to New York, and we also had performers in the fourth show that had been in the first show.
Yeah, I remember that.
And both of their numbers were extrapolations on the relationships from 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And how their relationship to that breakup had changed in the 4 years since they first performed and processed this. There was one performer in the first year who had a really incredible act about like a lot of pain that came from like a monumental like kind of first ever queer relationship, and having been cheated on in that relationship with somebody of the opposite gender, and that specific experience and all the shitty ways that makes you feel,
right,
and all the pain that you have to process. And then this year, or this past year that we did it, had an act about how they were able to become friends with that ex, and that it has also been a really painful process, but something that exists in a place that can be really beautiful, and can be good sometimes. Sometimes it's a hard line, because I'm like pretty half and half on whether or not I'm friends with an ex. I have enough exes who are friends with me that I feel like I'm capable of maintaining a good relationship, and like I'm being able to compartmentalize a lot of that pain and being able to see somebody as a full person.
Right.
And then I also have exes that I cannot ever speak to again.
Same. Yeah. I think that also part of it is media is a lie about a lot of it. Like the idea that you have to mourn a divorce is baloney.
Yeah.
Divorce is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's always a good thing, because it means two people who are not compatible with each other, having problems, shouldn't be together, don't want to be together, are no longer together.
Yes.
It is always a good thing.
Yes.
Even if the things that led to it were bad things.
And even if the process of going through it is expensive and like terrible.
Horrible. Yeah. It's still a good thing. But there's such a stigma on it.
That you've failed.
Right. That instead it's a success because you realized it wasn't right. And breakups are the same thing to a degree. Breakups are always good because you're moving on. It wasn't meant to be. Even if it's only one-sided, it's still not meant to be.
Yeah, because imagine what it feels like for the other person.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always found that really interesting. Now, of course, when you're going through it, it's miserable. Like when my ex, who I was engaged to, dumped me, I didn't eat for a week.
Yes.
Because she dumped me. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
You know.
Whereas she had probably made that decision for herself earlier.
Right. And just picked a terrible time to do it. You know, I'm friends with her now.
Yes.
We get on really well. The reality was I just didn't see it then. And once that cloud lifted, I was like, oh, but you're still a really cool person.
And time has a big deal, or a big thing to do with that, too.
Sure.
That time passes, and it is able to
Those
become
wounds
less painful,
heal.
For sure.
They never go away, though. Like,
That's scar tissue.
It is. I mean, but what's interesting is, like, also, like, when you involve sex in it, like, to not look at someone as a sexual being after you did at one point is also weird.
That's there's a real transition from romantic and sexual to platonic, and vice versa. And I think there's also one of the big things about Burlexes too is that that ex and I were I was also very involved in that friend group, and it was hard for me to break up with that person and subsequently like feel like I couldn't also be a part of that friend group.
Right.
And it wasn't that I couldn't be a part of it, but that there were some things I could say and some things that were not okay for me to say, despite all of those things being real to me at the time. Really intense feelings that I needed to validate somewhere, and I needed to be heard and to be seen. And the first Burlexes especially was there was such a focus on vulnerability. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the narrative too, that there are so many expectations around how relationships are supposed to go, and there are also so many expectations on how breakups are supposed to go. Yep. And I think that there is this unspoken idea that being able to be friends with your ex makes you a more emotionally intelligent person.
Which is incorrect.
It's very incorrect.
Especially if that person is toxic or...
It's just not a combination. It's like the combination of any two persons, right, is so completely dependent on what exists between those two people and what those two people make for each other, that to tell me across the board that I have to be friends with all of my exes or else I'm not emotionally mature or intelligent is obscene.
It's ridiculous. But it's also this idea that we blame ourselves for everything or nothing. Like what I would be curious about in a future Burlexes show, which if y'all haven't caught on to, is a burlesque show or a variety show mostly about the post-relationship. Like, what if someone who's a performer who feels like they were justified in their actions and did nothing wrong in the breakup, what would that act look like?
Yes.
You know, totally. or you know, it's just, there are so many different sides to the emotion of a breakup.
Oh my God.
It's why that show fascinates me more than other shows, just because I feel like it's one of those things where you can say there's no right answer.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, there are so many different ways to be a shitty person, a good person, a thoughtful person, a thoughtless person, you know.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to me when you put that on stage or write a song about it, what does that look like?
Yeah.
From all perspectives.
It's...
What was the inspiration for the first one? Was it just a breakup?
It was that breakup.
It was that breakup.
5 years ago. And the relationship truly wasn't that long even. It wasn't like a super long-term relationship, but it was devastating to me. And I think that part of that was I personally was in a place that was having so much trouble like feeling visible. And not even that I needed the attention. As I learned I hate. Based on our earlier conversation about Instagram, I like hate attention. But at the time it was that like there are some... So one of the big inspirations behind the first Burlexes and in that motivation was like the complete and utter demolition of the stigma of like a crazy ex-girlfriend, which is a super misogynistic phrase. And not to say that there aren't women who are capable of being like toxic and abusive, because like, oh my God, that's real. And that's so it's hard because so many things go into how you handle the destruction of a relationship. Everything plays into it. It's both of your traumas. It's like it's all of these coping mechanisms that the two of you have or don't have. And I really, for the first Burlexes, I needed to feel, because I broke up with that person and I needed to feel justified in doing that and feeling it fully and experiencing it fully. And like that was a love that I lost in a really painful way. And I needed that to be expressed somewhere. And so kind of like selfishly, I was like, let's do, to my troupe at the time, I was like, let's do a whole burlesque show based on breakups. And then everybody was like so in love with that idea, and then it came from there. And so that act, the vomit act, like was not something that I would have made ever unless it was for a show that was centered around this entire landscape of breakups. And that was it was a really beautiful and really healing experience. There were so many amazing acts in that show. I want to also shout out to Nick's Nocturne, who was the first feature performer that we'd ever had. They're so good, and their act was like integral. It was the feature act, and they start as a Victorian widow in mourning, and over the course of that act become a black widow spider.
Oh, cool.
And it's really, really cool. And like another that narrative too is about going from being the victim in a breakup to becoming the villain. And that's another like accountability conversation that we were just having. And that there weren't shows in New York at the time that I felt I could do that. And so that's totally the thing that producers do too. That's
they create to fill the void.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely.
Or that like they're like, I want to see this somewhere.
So I
will make it happen because nobody else is going to do it, and I have to do it.
Oh yeah. Since I started producing, like the reason there was a Scrubs show, besides it being an inside joke between me and Mary Sin, who was an inside joke with like Mary Sin and the folks of Epic Wind Burlesque before that, like I wanted it to happen, so we made it happen finally.
Exactly.
Or the same thing with the Scott Pilgrim show, which you were a part of and you were phenomenal in.
Thank you.
Like,
if you're listening to this and you're thinking about that kind of relationship to an idea, that you have an idea and you want to put it up somewhere, you can do it.
Yeah.
And I urge you to do it because I think that, just speaking from like somebody who lives in New York, I think that there's room.
Oh, absolutely.
For interesting, like, new ideas. I think that there's such room for all of whatever you're thinking of, like, making.
And if you don't think that you can produce it, because not every performer is a producer, then talk to someone who is a producer. Like, I find as a producer, I don't always have ideas.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I am a part of a 3-person production team, and so we often come up with stuff. But there are times where, like, I don't know, what do you want to do? So, like, if you have ideas, talk to people. There's nothing wrong with that. The worst they'll say is no, or we're not really interested, or whatever.
Yeah.
But, like, also, I didn't know how badly I needed to express certain things on stage, either verbally or through movement or whatever, until I've done it. Like, I had horrible stage fright. And when it comes to doing certain things on stage, I still have that.
Yeah.
But as of now, I've performed a lip sync on stage, I've hosted on stage, and I've DJ'd.
Yeah.
Like, so will I strip someday? Maybe. I don't know that I have the confidence for that yet. But the point is that I no longer say I can't do something. Except singing on stage live. I can't do that. Mostly because I cannot sing well. But like, and I think something that I love about your work as a burlesque performer, as well as like a stage manager and a kitten and whatever that you do, is I see a person of vision. Like, you don't just do something. Like, I've seen you haphazardly do stuff.
Sure.
I've seen you do acts where you've told me backstage, yeah, it's sort of done. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. But I've also seen you, when you want to have a 10,000-foot view, you do, and you execute so well.
Thank you.
Does that come from you were in school for theater, right?
I was, and I am on and off. That is, okay, Lord. Even before I went to college for theater, I was stage managing in New York.
That's true.
That was like fresh out of high school. And that, wow, there's so much praise that I can sing about Sarah Tops.
Oh my God, I could talk forever.
Yeah, Sarah Tops is a burlesque producer and performer in New York who doesn't necessarily do so much of either anymore, but was a really formative person in my young adult life. And I actually met Sarah because we were neighbors. She and Dick Move lived upstairs from me and my family.
Oh, awesome.
In the same apartment building, and so that's how we met. And one of the things that I learned from her, and this is weird because I'm now the age that Sarah was when she met me, was that, like, you just have to go for it.
Yeah.
And so just going for it has proven that, to me at least, that every single person who is an expert at something has for a significant portion of that time pretended to be an expert at that something before
Absolutely
they became
correct.
one.
Absolutely correct.
So much of this is about going into something and saying that, like, even if I am pretending that I deserve to be here, nobody else is going to question that I deserve to be here.
Correct.
And that was a huge thing for me to learn. And that was a huge thing that I had to learn as a producer too. I started producing in college, and that was a lot easier because there wasn't really money to be tendered in those settings, because it was more like a group of people coming together to do something that they really loved and charging pay what you can at the door.
Right.
And so money was never the intention, but that was like such a place of privilege. And it's this thing about burlesque too, is that it's not necessarily a lucrative industry. And any producer will tell you that.
Yes.
That so much of this is a labor of love, and that it has to come from such a place of love.
Well, because there's this need to put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're producing a show, to just be performance, but to not... There are plenty of shows that exist that are just nice to look at.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. There's room for all of it. Yeah.
Correct. But I've always found, as a producer personally, if I am not invested in the thing I'm producing, or not producing with people who are invested in the thing that we're producing, it falls flat. It feels empty.
And that's dangerous.
And because then and also you talk about just going for it. The reason I have 4 podcasts is because I was like, putting out what you want to see in the world. Like, I'm mad at myself now because the shows that I make, I wish someone else made so I could listen to them. And I listen to my own shows because I'm a tiny bit narcissistic. But also, it's one of those things where it's like nobody's doing an in-depth analysis about Mass Effect. And if we play the characters true to ourselves, what do the sexual relationships look like? What do the interactions between the characters look like? Why do we make those choices? So I'm making one. And I'm insanely jealous of our listeners because I'm someone who would love this kind of show.
Yeah.
But I'm listening to it very differently because I make it.
Totally.
You know? And it's the same thing with Burlesque. I found like producing the shows that I produce, when I get to be the DJ, more or less I can remove myself a little bit, even though I'm helping producing it, because I'm in the back playing the music or on the side playing the music. For sure. So I'm removed from the show.
The emotional investment is not the same as producing it.
Right. But when I'm hosting or performing on the odd occasion, I have to be invested in the theme and the show, because if I'm not, I don't know how I would do it. Yeah. I just don't think I could.
So much of this comes from a place of like, I have to, otherwise I will explode. There was an interview that I was reading from like an actor that I really liked, and the question always is like, do you have any advice for young people who are trying to get into this field? And this actor was like, you cannot really imagine yourself doing something else if this is the thing that you want to do, and if you want to go for this, you cannot really picture yourself doing something else and like thriving in that and loving every second of that. Like survival gigs are definitely a thing,
right?
But the thing about having to love it is also why I only do Burlexes once a year, right? Because I have to love it. Right.
And I imagine doing that as a monthly show would wreck you, I'm sure. Yeah. Like, how could you... That would be a lot of mental strain,
compromising my love for this show is something that I'm really afraid of, and also something that's... It comes and it goes. I think because... So I'm in the process of planning the 5th anniversary of Burlexes right now, and my relationship to the post-relationship has changed. And that is... inevitable and something that I'm welcoming, and I'm really interested to see how this impacts the show this year, because the whole thing is that your relationship to your relationships changes because your relationship to yourself changes, right? And to the person that you used to be, and being able to be self-critical and being able to be analytical, and being able to... I think that a lot of the pain from breakups comes from wanting to hold somebody accountable for all of this pain. And that has to also be part of it, you know? Yeah. So I'm really interested to see how it plays out this year.
Is there ever a year when you do it and then you go, never again, I'm done?
I think that I hit the point of never again in like the 2 weeks right before Burlexes.
And then you forget. It's like, I guess, like the rumor of childbirth, that you hate it the whole time, but then afterwards, and you see a baby, you're like, aw. Yeah. Like almost like you brainwash yourself to this experience that's really intense, that you're like, oh, it'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah. When I was rehearsing for my performance in our Panic at the Disco show, I was like, this will be fine, when I was 3 months out. And then when I realized I was a month out and I hadn't rehearsed once, I was like, and then like the hours before, I was a mess. I was just freaking out. Yeah. And then I did it and it was over. I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But I promise you, I'm planning an act already for next year. I'm going to go through the same thing again.
Yeah. That's part of the process.
Is it?
It is part of the process.
Because it's new to me. Like, do you feel that way about the acts that you do?
It took me... so I've been performing burlesque for just close to 7 years, somewhere before or after that, maybe 6. Okay. It's hard to keep track.
Numbers
and also,
are
like,
hard.
What even counts? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, oh God. But I want to say it took me maybe 3 or 4 years before I stopped blacking out on stage. Wow. But that's also I don't come from a performing arts background, and I think neither do you. Like, I'm not trained in acting. I'm not really, like, I don't love public speaking. Like, that's not my main thing, is like getting up in front of a bunch of people and doing whatever I do. But it did take me a long time before I could step off stage and remember that I had done something on stage, or that I could remember a moment that I experienced of, like, I looked into the audience and I saw this person and we made eye contact. Right. I could not tell you any of those details for the first 3 years that I was doing it. But I also wasn't performing very frequently, and part of it has to do with, like, do this as much as you can allow yourself to, and as much as other people want to have you, because all of that experience is essential. Because it's so... the point, when you get to that point, it's magical because it is an experience that you are sharing with people instead of something that other people are watching you do.
Yeah.
Because, like, you're not even watching you do it.
Right.
You know?
It's transactional to a degree. Well, yeah, the first show, and I've told this on the podcast before, but the first show I ever hosted for MGB was a basement show with like 15 people, and I blacked out the whole
absolutely.
time. Like, I don't remember any of the show except when I got on stage and when I walked off stage.
Yep.
And so, like, and that changed over time, whereas now I host pretty easily.
Yeah.
For me, I'm still a little anxious, but for the most part, if there's, like, a handful of people in the room that I know, strangers being in the room don't bother me.
Yeah.
And, like, it got to the point where, like, at the video game show, I was so comfortable because the video games are such a niche that I know super well and I'm confident about with 2 video game podcasts under his belt. Like, I made a joke about a game that landed and people erupted. I made a joke about Fallout 76 being a ghost town or whatever, and, like, the room went nuts. Where I could never tell that joke anywhere else.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I felt comfortable in that room because I knew the audience and I knew the subject matter really well.
Yeah.
It's why I feel so confident about music burlesque shows, because I'm a big music nerd, and, like, so spending a whole show nerding out about a specific band or a specific type of music is really, it feels familiar to me.
What we forget too is that everybody in the audience is rooting for you.
Yeah.
We want to like you.
Yeah. Unless you're
And we
at
just
a bar.
want you to be yourself. Like, yeah. Yep.
Unless you're, like, at a bar forcing people to endure your show. But otherwise, if it's a planned show in a space that has shows,
It's a performance-oriented space, yeah.
they want to be there.
Definitely.
They've paid to be there.
As far as the I never want to fucking do this again feeling goes, there's a performer in Chicago, Right This Way Robbie, who I'm very close with, who is in that Burlexes in Chicago. And that was a really special show because it was also a goodbye party because I was moving away. I was moving back home to New York. But he said something to me that I carry with me always whenever I'm in a horrible headspace about performing, is that he said, there is a point where this show will happen. Literally, whether or not you do anything.
Yeah, that's true.
At a certain point, there comes a time, there's a threshold that you cross where, like, even if I were to dip right now and fly across the country and, like, move away and never see any of you fuckers again, like, this show is going to happen because people came here and your performers showed up and somebody is going to get on stage and do something and give them that show. And that's such a sweet thing to remember when I'm in the midst of, like, Burlexes hell. That, like, this is going to happen because the show is for the most part curated. It's a lot of people that I trust will make this show the magical thing that it is every year, because we all have a real sense of what this show is.
Right.
I gotta stop producing by myself, probably.
I mean, that would be helpful. I don't think
thing.
I could do it without Betty and Raina.
Totally.
Like, they... Also, because part of it is, like, they support my stupid ideas. Like, it's something that simple. But also, like, something that we're very good at as a team is when one of us doesn't have the spoons to do something, the other two just go, okay, we'll do it. Yeah. And I think that it would behoove you to find someone that you can do that with, even if they're not a full-time producer of this show.
Truly.
Just someone... I could list on 2 hands people who would probably want to help you with this on any degree, and so I think you should embrace that.
Thanks.
I'm just saying. Yeah. Should make your life a little easier, right? At least where we can.
And also because Burlexes is, it's a burlesque show, but it also has so many elements.
It does.
To it.
And it's not just burlesque.
It's such
because you do have live music, and you've had spoken word and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that going into it thinking about it as, like, an experience is a little bit helpful. It sounds really pretentious, but it is, like, it is an evening, and as somebody who's been to the show, I think that you can kind of attest to the world that we build in that space.
Well, there's a vibe. The minute you walk in the door, there's a familiar feeling, especially if you've been through this. Like, I'd imagine if you were someone who's in their 20s and never been through a breakup, walking into that room might feel a little odd. Sure. But otherwise, any other part of that spectrum, you will recognize that space.
And that we are also like honoring relationships that maybe were never even recognized as relationships at the time. Yeah. God, we've had really incredible moving moments in the show that had to do with, like, people that never acknowledged what you were.
Yeah.
You know, we do a swap table that where you can bring things that your ex gave you and exchange it for things that other people's exes gave them. That
you might have a good memory attached to because it's from that show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are some, and also there have been objects. I personally know most of the stories for all of those objects because people will make a point to come to me and be like, or if it's a performer bringing something to donate, they'll also have the story of why they're bringing this thing.
Right.
And knowing that is so powerful.
Sure.
And to also be like, I just thought that it was a really pretty necklace, so I took it.
And that let it being that frivolous. There's nothing wrong with that.
Totally. And that's a release that's really wonderful. And this year and the year before, we did the flash paper thing, where audience members write in a sentence or a couple sentences something about a past relationship that they want to let go, and then the host and I will read those on stage and set them on fire and release them into the universe for everyone to hear, and everybody being a part of that. It's such an important thing for me, for the audience to feel like they're healing too. Well,
especially even if they don't have something to add to it, like they don't write something down, the people react to it. Like they either go "oh" or like a visceral, like guttural reaction if it's like terrible stuff.
You hear yourself in these things, and this is something I think about a lot too, is that even as children, and this is why I think that like I'm really passionate about theater, and I think that like good theater for young audiences they trust the children to be intelligent and to be human beings, and because like we're searching for ourselves on stage, where we want to be understood and we want to be mirrored, and when we see an experience of ours be mirrored on stage without us having to have asked for it is really such a powerful thing to say, oh my god, that I see myself in that. Last year I did an act where I cut my hair on stage, and that was really emotional for a lot of people, and I didn't necessarily expect it, but I guess that it is kind of it's just such a joke, right? That like you go through a breakup and you cut your hair off, right? But also that's so real.
It is, and it's relatable. I think the most drastic changes I've ever made to my hair, like I had hair down past my shoulders, and then after a bad breakup, I shaved it off to like really short buzz cut. And there's just something satisfying doing that. Dyeing too, like when you were in the Scott Pilgrim show, you did a variant on an act you've done before where you dye your hair on stage. And like your act happened in the first half, and by the end of the second half,
for curtain call,
it's a different color. And like I remember when you came out on stage, people like there were audible gasps. Like people were like, oh my god, like they really dyed their hair.
They really did that.
Yeah. I think,
God, I love it.
I think physical change in a performance space is really powerful.
Yeah.
I think that's why the act of stripping, for me at least as an observer, like sometimes it's just sexy. Like sometimes it's just that basic and animalistic that
and I find... is hot, and I'm so glad.
Right. But sometimes it's more than that. And some of my favorite performances are ones where there's a real change on stage, where it's an emotional arc or physical change. Yeah. Like those things tend to resonate because I think those are more visceral a person's their own experience.
That's so much of Burlexes. I'm thinking about all the acts that we had last year, and they're so Davina Grandsparkle did an act where she cut meat off of her body.
Yeah.
It wasn't her own flesh. It was like I don't want to like gross people out too much, but that's also I wanted that act because of how visceral it is.
Right.
And like, oh my god, that the like likening, like you don't have to perceive that to be about a breakup, but when it's placed in that context, oh my god.
Well, and also like you said, like she had meat attached to her and she's cutting the meat off, but it definitely resembles cutting off your own flesh, even though they're definitely not.
And the noise and smell of meat. It's like everything about that is so like all-encompassing.
And also Davina Grandsparkle is a fairly upbeat, over-the-top, comical performer. And even in that space, it reads in this way that's just so different.
Yes.
Which is fascinating to me.
Totally. I also want to mention the zine that we do. And that's integral to Burlexes because... starting out in burlesque, I did a lot of nerdlesque stuff specifically, and a lot of nerdlesque stuff shows you generally are well served to have a sense of the source material before you go into a burlesque show.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
And that actually, I think, is what makes an incredible nerdlesque act, is when you haven't seen the source material, but you
enjoy
love
it
that
anyway.
act anyway. Yeah, I think that's amazing, and I love when that happens. And so for Burlexes, there is no way for everybody in the audience to understand all the relationships that all these people have been through that got us to this point.
Right.
And so the zine is necessary. It functions as kind of a program or a playbill for the audience. Every single member of the audience gets one. And all it is every performer gets a 2-page spread of like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And we compile them all together, and each performer gets to contextualize the relationship that they're performing about. And that can be through poetry, and it can also be through visual art. And we've had collages in the past. We've had consensually shared screenshots of text messages.
Wow.
And yeah, like some of those are like my very favorite things. It's so painful and so rich, and sometimes you can tell so much. It's amazing how much of a story you can tell so simply. I love that. I love this show so much.
Yep.
And talking about it makes me really want to do it. And I think maybe that's such a funny, wonderful thing to have gotten to a place where I've done this show for so long that my relationship to it can change.
Right. That this show that's about changing relationships itself also changes.
Absolutely.
And your relationship to it changes.
Yeah.
I mean, also, like, last year, going to the show as an audience member, it was such a specifically distilled experience for me that I know, and it's known that you may not have the same experience as the person sitting next to you. That's not what it's about. It's your experience with the show. But, like, I have no idea what my experience will be next time. I'm not in the same headspace I was a year ago. My relationship is amazing and I love my wife, but that doesn't mean that I'm more or less depressed than I was last year. And so like how you engage with that, I think what's interesting to me about not necessarily dramatic, but definitely emotionally charged things is I am an emotional person who didn't realize until earlier this year that the medication I was on that my psychiatrist put me on was muting my emotional experience.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm someone who can cry listening to songs he loves, hates, is happy, sad. I cry a lot listening to music. I'm an emotional listener to music. And it wasn't until recently that I realized I spent a lot of time last year not crying to music.
Totally.
Because of the medication I was on.
Absolutely.
And it had helped me in so many other ways because I was in a bad way.
Yeah.
But instead of being in a really bad place, I was now in a middle place. And I wasn't any place. And it wasn't until earlier this year that I realized, oh, that was that. And now, while the lows can still be really low, the highs are much higher now.
Yeah.
And that's something you don't realize. And so, like, I'm wondering if I'll experience the show differently because I was already emotional at that show. But now that that's changed for me, if I'll experience more or less or what.
It's such an immensely, like, treasured and cherished thing that, like, every single person brings all of them into that room. Yeah. That's so good and so cool. Yeah. And I love also that it's such a the expectation at burlesque shows too is that you cheer when something happens that you like on stage. And Burlexes is one of those shows where things are happening on stage that you like and can love deeply, but cheering is not the right response. Yeah. And there are other ways to respond to what you're watching and other ways to show a performer that, like, yes, I see you. Yeah. And yes, that this is, I treasure this and I thank you for sharing this with us. Can I talk about the third Burlexes that I ever did?
Yeah. You can talk about whatever you want. This is your episode.
I mean, I guess. This was in Chicago. And in Chicago, we did the show in an apartment. So that was cool. And we typically do the show in small spaces anyway, but having it in a living space was really special. We had kind of like set up a performance area in the living room, and it was a long apartment. So the kitchen's all the way at the other end of the apartment, and that was where folks entered, and we had like pizza, and the pizza went fast. So there was no pizza very soon after that. And so I will usually, I placed myself right after intermission because my piece that year I had gone through maybe my worst suicidal and depressive episode. And leaving Chicago was it was a deeply emotional experience for me for a lot of reasons. But my performance that year started with, it was me coming into the apartment and then moving about the space as if I was getting home from work and doing all the things that I have to do to live and to be home and to be alive and to go to bed. And the other things about that performance, a lot of things went into it, but one of them was that all of the lights were off in the apartment. And it was suggested, but never explicitly stated, that you, as an audience member, could use whatever source of light you wanted to light whatever you wanted to see. And so all the lights turned off and the music started. And the music that I used was the track Technically Missing from the Gone Girl soundtrack composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus.
Yeah.
And it's so silly, but to say that out loud. But it was a really, that performance was also at the height of when I was visible on Instagram, and I was also getting so fucking tired of being so visible.
Right.
And I wanted the act to be about how you can live and not be performing. And like you can heal, and it doesn't have to be performative healing.
Right.
And you don't have to tell anybody that you're healing and doing that work for yourself.
Right.
And actually, you should focus on doing the work for yourself instead of proving to other people that you're healing.
Yeah.
And so all the lights were off, and I was moving through the apartment and going to the kitchen and opening the fridge, and then going to the bathroom, and then going to the bedroom, and then going back to the kitchen and opening the fridge, even though nothing has changed and I didn't put anything in the fridge. But that's what we do when we're home, is we look at the fridge over and over and over again, and nothing changes. Because it was so dark, somebody caught on really quickly and followed me with their phone light on. And I didn't expect this to happen, but like everybody started to use their phones to light my way. And because the apartment was really full, and it was not a massive apartment, but what ended up happening, because I was moving so rapidly through the apartment, is that audience members lined the walls of the apartment
with their
and
lights.
Stopped following me, and they backed against the walls, and all of them lit the apartment. And no matter where I looked, it was just lights, and I couldn't see anyone's faces. And it was like the most isolating and freeing experience of like moving through the world as myself, and knowing too that other people are there and are watching me, and having to not care for like, or heal for their sake.
Right.
And I think that was a really intense and immersive thing. And I think that if you were thinking about how Burlexes feels based on the way that we're describing it, I think that this kind of experience was and is like a pretty good example of like the extremes of that space.
Sure.
And how the show transforms the emotional landscape of the room.
And that people like just lean into it.
Mm-hmm. That people want to participate. And that's really, like, again, like something I really prioritize, is that audience members feel welcome and like they belong, and not in a way that like not as in like they came to the show because they're huge fans of the franchise.
Right.
But that it is a hard show. And this year for Burlexes, last year, the fourth year, 2 or 3 performers, I want to say 3 performers over the course of the process dropped out. 2 of them within the week or days before the show.
Wow.
Because it's hard.
You're right, because it's just too much.
It's a hard show, and it can bring up a lot of really hard things. And like the only way that we can do this and handle this is together.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of the experience that I want to make.
That's awesome. I didn't intend for this episode to be a focus on Burlexes and a retrospective of it, but I'm glad it was.
Anytime.
I'm so happy that you're on the show on your own. It was a pleasure to have you with Lefty and Anya to support the Nerdlust Fest last year, but I love you, and I'm a big fan of the work you do.
Yeah.
It's sometimes infuriating that I'm so jealous sometimes of how smart you are and the things you've come up with. Like, again, and I've said it before in the space, and I'll say it now on the air, I think Burlexes is one of the most brilliant ways to express yourself in a visual medium that I've ever seen.
Wow.
It's just because I would have never thought of that.
Thank you.
As an emotional person who was called a crybaby as a kid, who was like someone who didn't know how to always process his emotions, dealing with toxic masculinity and being fragile and feminine, like all this, like it's such an openly emotional show.
Yeah.
That's why I like it so much.
Thank you.
I promise that Hart likes really happy and awesome things too. But I urge the listeners to follow Hart where you can on the internet and pursue this show because it's definitely worth seeing.
Thanks. Burlexes is an end of summer sport.
Yeah.
And is tentatively set for end of August, beginning of September in New York City.
Yeah.
That's a real like changing of the seasons feeling too. It has to be like the dusk of the summer.
Yeah, totally.
For it to feel what it is. Yeah.
But you can follow. You know where to find me on Instagram if you're listening to the show, or on Facebook or Twitter, and I will tweet, share, and post the hell out of this show once there's an official announcement.
Thank you.
But thank you for being on the show with me.
Thank you.
Maybe next time we'll talk about video games and music and other things.
I love you too. So it's like there's so much fun stuff to do on this planet, and I look forward to it. It doesn't always have to be so internal and introspective, but I also love tenderness. I also want to say that I have loved every second of talking about this with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The easier I can get the guests talking without me having to say a damn thing is my preferred way to engage in this podcast. As I know some people listen for me, but most people are tuning in for the guests. So, Hart, thank you for being on the show. Heart Crimson, is there anywhere on the internet that you want to share with people?
I mean, I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
And if you want to, if you're listening to this and you want to engage with me more, I would recommend sending me a message on Facebook and specifically saying that you heard me talking about this. Because then I will know that you're not a rando that I can't trust.
Exactly. The last thing I'll ask you to do is do our sign off. The show, I sign it off with the phrase, music is life and life is good. And it's evolved from my music podcast is this idea that as long as you're making art that you enjoy or you're proud of, life can't be that bad.
Truly.
So if you will sign us off with that phrase, I would really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness. Music is life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of Crash Chords Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and Facebook. You'll help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email matt.storm@crashchords.com or hit us up on Twitter @CrashChordsWeb. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Victor Devon, and I am the host of We Burlesque, the podcast. Every Monday, I talk to fabulous denizens of nightlife, including burlesque performers, both seasoned and new to the form, drag performers, performance artists, DJs, and artists who make up their respective scenes. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Please visit weburlesque.com to check out episode recaps and see all the formats available. And remember that music is life. Life is good.